Right, today's fun. We're going to start tackling Battlefleet Mars. Very, very briefly, I'm going to hit an intro later. It's a real intro. We're only going to do the tactical game, the rules for the tactical game. But I have played this before. I think I played it once. I was left unimpressed in my own way. However, reading the rules, much as the last time that I looked at it, I'm absolutely in love with the concept of the game. And we'll take a brief look at, this is the main map that you play the strategic game on. You've got two different combat systems for this game. One is the fast combat system, and I may have used that because I decided I couldn't cope with this. I'm going to give it a shot again with the enhanced tactical combat system. I don't usually like games that have battle boards in them, but this is more than a battle board. This is like an SFB style battle system, right? Like this is a very complex and not all that detailed. It doesn't have the richness that some of the space combat games do in terms of different types of weapons. What it reminds me most of for the tactical system is this attack vector tactical core rules. And it's trying to do almost the same things. Notably, three-dimensional vector movement. It's using a different mechanism. This isn't the only game that SPI used a 3D vector movement system in, but from what the designer's notes say, this is the first, and probably the first ever game that used it for space combat. The tactical combat system itself is Redmond Simonson's design, and I think it leaked its way into some other games, notably, what is it? Something Alpha Centauri. Kind of remember something similar, but much more abstracted, making its way into Outreach. But I may be mistaken, but I remember there's a battle board in that. Anyway, very briefly, for what you have component-wise for this, you have two maps. Basically, this one is the z-axis. Consider that it's like standing up, so that you're expressing a huge cube of territory in the game. And each object in the game is represented by two counters. So for example, this base here, here's where it is on the XY axis, and then on the same x-axis, it's existing on the XZ axis as well. So the problem is, it's very hard to determine where something actually is, like to picture it in your head. The designer's notes say, yeah, you'll get used to it. Yeah, I don't think I will. I had a lot of trouble with, I don't know if I can find it back here, Starship, Web and Starship down there, which also used, but it used a strategic three-dimensional game. Which was very problematic. We'll talk about the fun stuff over there on the strategic game. That was designed more by the secondary designer or the other designer of the game. The game was proposed by Simonson, and then Brad Hessel took over the design of the political and strategic military side of things for the most part. Although both Simonson and the developer, who's Kostakin, had input into what was going to be done everywhere. But I think this is almost entirely Simonson's baby. Okay, what else do you have? You have this, but you don't need it. That's part of the strategic game. It's for range finding and such. Now, like I said, every single piece on the board has two counters. One to indicate its XY and one to indicate its XZ. In a sense, you wouldn't even need, to do this dual map thing. You could use altitude counters or something like that. but they would have to be rather large numbers. And they might make things more difficult to visualize. I actually think it might be easier to visualize. Now, the attack vector uses a layering where you stack things to indicate how high something is. I don't know how well that works. I tried fiddling around with it, but I didn't have chocolate kisses, so I couldn't learn the game. So what do you have? Well, these are the different types of ships or different types of tactical counters that are used on the board. I'm not going to worry about any of this other stuff. That's all for the strategic game. You have bases. These are fighters. These are missiles. We won't be using them in the first scenario that I play, but I may play another scenario where we're testing those out. These are catapult ships. They're the largest and heaviest of the ships in the game. Miners are the second largest ships in the game, and then these are transports, which are the third. The fighters are obviously very, very small and almost completely disposable, and they're completely disposable unless you want to, do some hand-waving explanation as to why they're not. You're going to have, for this, a battle record where you track the information on each ship. And what you do is, the ship information is very limited. It's not like the SSDs in Starfleet Battles. It's closer to what you get in like Starfire, but what it really comes down to is you write down the ID of the ship. It's got a number of lasers. There's such a limited number of types of ships, etc., that you don't really have to worry too much. It's got the number of laser points that it has, and those will get marked off as they take hits. It has launch capability, again marked off as it takes hits. Missile and fighter capability. I'm not worried about any of these, but launches can take hits. Missiles and fighters, you mark off as you fire them. And then burn capacity, which is how strong the engines are for tactical maneuvering. What you'll see is the smaller ships have a stronger burn capacity. And then an amount of fuel on board the ship. One of the keys to this whole system is that everything in it is really damn near technology. It is technology that wasn't far from what was available at the time, and it's still kind of that way, right? It's going to be using, Newtonian physics. It's going to be using nothing too exciting. And in the strategic game as well, there's nothing that's really like, wow, we really made a jump. And in fact, the time is 2096. We're supposed to be, out mining the asteroids with a colony on Mars and everything. A colony on Mars that's had enough time to last a generation. This should be for the regular intro. Okay, let's take a look at the combat charts. Well, the charts and tables. Okay. So, this is going to be used to indicate how much you have to burn to I didn't explain a counter. These are your vector counters, which will be used to express what your current momentum is, basically. Okay. This burn components table is going to determine how much fuel you need to burn in order to change your vector from one vector to another. And it looks really complicated. We'll go over how that works here. True distance can be used in order to determine how many little tiny cubes on the XYZ cube you are away from the enemy. And that's hard to determine because you can figure out how many by counting on each of these boards, but then you have to figure out a means of combining them. And that's the same way the burn components works. The true distance works the same sort of way, where it's taking the information from all the possible the three possible directions that are involved and combining them for a total distance. Missile detonation, this will be firepower when we use missiles. Recovery table is used at the end of a scenario to see whether or not your ships can survive. Your ships that are badly crippled can either escape or are captured by enemies. We have a little sequence of play up here. And then most of this is the fire combats table, where you're going to be basically making a die roll with the amount of laser strength that you have to see how much you hit. And ships can fire individually. They can also fire in salvos or fire groups of 3 ships. No more, no less. Let me think if there's anything else I want to talk about before I jump in. Okay. I mean, the concept behind it as a whole is simple. The application is complex. So let's start taking a look at how the tacticals... The rule book is very verbose. I'm not sure which of the authors, everybody involved may be a little bit that way. It ends up giving you a lot of the rich history or alternate history or prospective history of what's going on. It's very, very exciting to read about. It makes the background, available to you, but it also kind of takes away from the rules. It also has some punny stuff in it, a little bit of humor, but anyway. Let's get to the tactical system. We've got a number of things that are expressed here as a glossary of terms, where they talk about things like cube, what that means. It's like, this is a square, right? But the square at, say, 08 on the z-axis, when you combine the 2 maps, one location is a cube. And you'll be measuring things in cubes. Okay. The battles always happen at a location of importance. The size of space, etc., the velocities that the interplanetary travel is going at are just too high for you to kind of engage and for it to be anything meaningful outside of where there's an object of interest that you're actually fighting over, a planet, a asteroid, whatever. And there's a limited number of those that are of enough interest to bring to actually send ships to. Okay, the sequence of play. The first thing that happens, all right, first you set up the battle. When you're playing in the campaign, you have the opportunity to say, I don't think I want to fight before you set up. And all you know at that point is how many ships the enemy has and what you have and the condition of your ships. But then you deploy on the board, and at the beginning of each turn, if you're far enough away, you have an opportunity to withdraw. Not on the first turn of the game, because you could actually withdraw right away at that point. So I guess you know what kind of ships they have. Yeah, you might as well know what kind of ships they have, because you'll be able to see it. All right. If you choose to withdraw, you can only do that if your ships are 9 or more cubes away from the enemy. Whatever ships are withdrawing have to be 9 or more cubes away from the enemy, or the enemy has to agree to let you go. Then missile burn and movement. All missiles on the tactical phase will move to the cube in which they are to attack an enemy ship. We'll go into the details of that. These are ones that are already on the board. Then joint burn phase. Each player can, they semi-simultaneously change the vector markers on their ships. Okay, right now none of these have any vector markers. They're all moving 0. The base can't move. All of these are operating as a group with a vector marker of 4 going this way. You can see they're on the same z-axis as all of the Martian, the Reds and the Martians, of course, the red planet and the blue planet. And this is the Ares Corporation, which is the evil big company that has been running the resource extraction, etc., and transport to Earth. We'll get more into all that later in another video. Okay, so the way you handle this is usually each ship will have its own vector marker on it. Well, the base case is that each ship will have its own vector marker on it, under it. And a tactical group, one ship in the group will have a vector marker under it, or you could use like a task force or something like that to try to indicate what's going on. I'm just putting it in the open because it doesn't matter. This is a group. I haven't defined a group over here. Nothing's moving. It's no big deal. They can all operate as a group. We'll talk about that in a bit too, because you have to be within 2 cubes of other units in the group to operate. I may be screwing up. We'll see. That weirds me out so much. It really did when, right after my wife first died. That's like the toilet down the basement every now and then, like it must be slowly draining. So once or twice a day, it fills up a little bit. And it just, I don't know. Okay. So the joint burn phase, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be changing the values of your vector markers. And you're going to use the burn components table to try to figure out, well, if I'm changing my vector to this, how much fuel do I have to burn? You mark that off, etc. This is all done semi-secretly, like I said, or simultaneously, because what you're doing is you're just putting new vector markers under each ship, essentially. And you mark off the fuel required to do that maneuver, or change in acceleration, or that acceleration. And you don't reveal them. Like the other player can't peek to see what you've done while you're doing it. They're all being done under each ship. So, it's a way to do it simultaneously. And I'm really making a botch of this, am I not? Okay. Then we go to missile and fighter salvo phase. You're allowed to launch missiles and fighters if you have them. There won't be any in this first scenario, but I'll hit the rules on that. When fighters are launched, they're launched with the same velocity that whatever is launching them has, which makes a lot of sense. With missiles, the situation's a little more complicated, but essentially they are matching your velocity when you're first launched. And we'll talk about how missiles work kind of weird. They've got their own little thing that just doesn't seem intuitive, but like it doesn't seem like an intuitive solution, but you look at it and you say, yeah, that makes sense afterwards. Okay. Then you hit the combat phase. This is a little weird. This feels kind of like Ney versus Wellington and Wellington's victory, where you alternate fire. Each person, like one person fires, then the other person fires. Normally in a space combat game, everybody fires at once, or in Car Wars or whatever. They're not choosing to do that here. I may need to use some cubes or something to mark who's fired and who hasn't, at least for any kind of large battles. And this looks big enough it's going to confuse me, and it's a really tiny one. But basically, each ship, you alternate who fires. You randomize who gets first shot. And this is one of the reasons why I think that fire groups are important, because they allow you to fire 3 ships at once instead of 1. And, you use your fire to pick off something that's dangerous to you, or to at least do a lot of damage to it. Then you hit the repair phase, where you're allowed to repair any damage that you've taken in your ships, a certain amount each turn. There's a repair value on here. I believe. Yeah, I know. I missed that. The first column here is the repair value. So this repairs a half point per turn. This repairs 1 or a half. I didn't know there were halves. It's probably 1 per 2, meaning that on each even turn you're allowed to do it. I don't know who's going to keep track of the turn count, though. Guess we'll need Mr. Lincoln for this game. Okay. And at this point, you're like, whoa, what happened to movement? Yeah. Joint movement phase happens last in the sequence, which is, again, kind of odd. It doesn't really make a difference. All the ships move according to their vector plot, which, is just a sequence of these numbers. A number marking how far you're going in all 3 directions, basically, against all 3 axes. The strength of things, so like laser, if you mark off the 4 box, this would have a 3 strength laser at that point. Just showing some things. Talked about withdrawal during a battle already. Movement and burning. Okay, let's go into the specifics of this, because it is a little complex. The big thing that's complex is changing these values on here. So in order to burn or accelerate, you have to figure out what you want to change your numbers to be. Okay? So my current velocity for these ships is 4 along the x-axis going that way. If I want to change that, let's say I wanted to change it to 2 going that way, that's pretty simple. Let's see what we got here. It's a 1 component change. I'm changing that component by 2. That's going to cost me 2. I don't even have to look that up, right? I can tell if I'm slowing down by 2 cubes in a linear fashion, that's just going to happen. But if it were more complicated, like I had a vector of 4 and 1 there, let's say I wanted to reduce this to 2, and I wanted to increase this to 2 as well. I would be making a 2-component change at that point. This one's changing by 2, this one's changing by 1, so I'd find the 2, 1 here, and that would still cost 2. Okay? If I was going to change to 2 here and to 4 here, this would be a 3-point change, this would be a 2-point change, so I would look for 3, 2, and that'll cost me 4. Nothing's allowed to burn more than 4, so we don't have to extend this chart to really large and ugly values. Similarly, with a 3-component change, you look up the 3 different numbers. So let's take a look. Let's say I'm reducing this by 2, increasing this by 3. And I want to, where's the z? The z is this way. And I want to increase this by 2. Okay. It was 3, 2, 2 in that case that I'm changing. So I look for that, and that's going to cost me 4. So I'm still allowed to do that if I have a burn capacity that's high enough. Now, if we look at the actual ships, the only thing that has a burn capacity of 4 that could do that maneuver are fighters. So you're not going to see that kind of acceleration happening with the ships that we're using in this game. The biggest thing that's available are the transports, which have a burn capacity of 3. The miners have a 2, and the catapults only have a 1. So that's probably one of the most complicated things in terms of explaining the rules. The most complicated thing is visualizing what the fuck the board actually means, which I don't have, and I'm hoping that I can get there at some point. When you actually move the ship, well, you move it a number of squares indicated by its total vectors. So this would go 4. Well, if we did the other example, let's say we did okay, we'll take this ship as an example. Let's say this is my plot for it. It would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then 1 up here, if I could find that correct ship. That's going to be hard. I've got everybody on the same plane, so, and they're all forced to be, actually, due to entrance, on the same, not necessarily x-axis. What they have to be at the start of the scenario is on the same side of the cube, the same face of the cube. Side is, I don't know, maybe not clear, not correct. Oh, okay. As needed, you can shift the map. You can also shift the vector markers, which could, if that ends up happening, you end up in a situation where bases have a momentum in relation to everything else. This is a little weird. When you set up the game, if there's more than one base in the game, they have to be at least 6 cubes apart. All right, laser combat. The main way that you fight is using the laser combat table. All right. Well, one thing that's of vital importance here is determining the true distance between two objects to see if they can shoot each other. So the way you look at this up is you first look on the XY axis, plane, and you count the distance. Now that can be pretty easy. Like here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right. This isn't very good because the chart isn't going to take me beyond 9. So let's just pretend that they're 4 apart here. Okay. And we can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So this gets me a lot closer. And imagine that whatever this ship is, it's got a counter right here, because it has to, the x-axis has to be the same for both counters. But we'll keep the z and the y exactly as they are otherwise. All right. So what I'd do to determine how far I am from this ship is I'd count 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how many x-axis differences I have. I have no y-axis differences, and I have no z-axis differences. Everything's on the same z-plane here. Well, we know how far that is. It's 4 cubes away. And we could look that up, but we can't because there's no 0 here. If we were like this, we would now be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 apart. So the xy would look at the 1-4, goes in the other order here for some reason, and we'd look at the 0z because we're on the same z. Now let's assume the z was 3 apart as well. Well, then we'd look at 1-4 to the z of 3, and we'd find out that they're 5 cubes apart. This is important because the range, first of all, you can't shoot if you're more than 9 hexes or 9 cubes away. Glad the game's not using like some kind of dodecahedrons to represent everything. Oh boy, would that be. Well, no, it couldn't be. And that's the thing, there's no hexagonal equivalent, is there? Okay. So that's the first thing, is figuring out whether or not, what the distance between two objects is. I'm going to need to swap batteries, and this is a good time for me to take a little break because of that. This is the longest, oh shit, my battery. The longest amount of time that I think I've not been up here playing games, which is weird. It's the only time I've ever, I think right after my wife died, I had been playing down in kind of the room I keep my books in, some clothes and stuff, for a while. I think I had seen this partially happen, but my toilet ran completely dry up here, as opposed to the one down the basement, which seems to run a little bit. Not much, but enough. Okay. So what were we looking at? We're looking at the laser fire. Yeah, so first of all, what ships are allowed to fire? They have to have at least a laser rating of 0 in order to fire, which is to say they haven't had all their boxes marked off. And if you look here, ships actually have a 0 box. They're allowed to fire at laser 0. Once that's marked off, they're no longer allowed to fire at all. Like I said, you sequence it. You roll a die, one person picks a ship, they fire it. The other person picks a ship, they fire it. You're going to have to use cubes or something else to mark who's fired, I think. Nothing that's given in the game. Because each ship's allowed to fire once. And the way you resolve it is you determine what the range between the ship and its target is. And you look at the ship's rating here to see what its laser value is currently. You roll a die and add the firing ship's laser strength to the die roll. Then you find that number on the leftmost column over here, I guess, ranging from 1 through 12, to determine which table it's using. Then you roll another die and find that row and compare it to the actual range, and you get a result. And you can see they kind of scatter the results around. For an explanation of the results, they're basically hits that are done on the tracks here, the same way that, like, I don't know, in SFB, you roll to see where you happen to hit things. Except here, it's mainly just one thing hit at a time. So if you get a IL, it's an impaired launch. A launch on the ship is crossed off for the ship undergoing the result. If you're hitting a fighter or missile, though, that'll destroy it. R's are repair capacity. That will knock off one of the boxes on the repair capacity. Fighters and missiles are destroyed by this. A D will destroy the entire ship. And you can see, this is kind of interesting. This is your initial roll. If you get lucky, you're rolling a die. A 6 is almost always going to be possible. If a 6 is not possible, a 12 is possible. They're not both possible. Basically, you have a 1 in 36 chance of destroying any ship with any shot, no matter how weak the shot is. What else you get is a little bit more difficult to discern, to tell you the truth. Okay, B in a number is how much burn capacity boxes you knock off. If you get rid of all their burn capacity, the ship is crippled. And then L with a number, like L3, is how much laser gets knocked off if you knock all of the laser off on a ship. The ship is, I don't think the term is crippled. I think there's another term. I don't remember quite what it is. It's basically unable to fight anymore, and it can't repair that any longer. Now, if you recall, I said in a couple of things, if a ship is a fighter or missile, it's destroyed instead. With actual missiles, any hit destroys it. They're very, very weak. But if you get a dot, you missed. Okay. Let me see. I think that's about it. All right, missiles and fighters. So, my battery. In this scenario, there aren't missiles and fighters. In the campaign game, they show up over the course of the game. Ares Corporation starts building missiles very early. I think it's turn 2 of the campaign game. The Martians are allowed to start building fighters I think, on turn 5. But both sides can learn from the other. We won't go into how that happens until we look at the campaign game itself. All right. Ships have a cargo capacity indicating what they can carry. Essentially, I believe, okay, so the cargo capacity is going to be the number of missiles or the number of fighters that you can carry. The number of missiles, that's a cargo capacity, that's straight up. They're 1-to-1. Fighters cost 2 cargo to carry. So you could actually be carrying a mixture of fighters and missiles, but the fighters cost twice as many spaces as otherwise. When you launch a missile or fighter, you note it on your battle record by marking it off. You can transfer them from ship to ship during the campaign game, blah, blah, blah. When you launch a fighter, you have to record him over here. There may not be enough fighters to, I mean, you can see there's only a few of them here, and there's a whole bunch available that you might actually have in your fleet. Whatever. We'll work it out. Okay. You don't have to worry about damage. Missiles don't need a chart. You don't need to worry about damage or anything on them. When a fighter is released, it's given velocity markers that are exactly identical to its releasing ship. The missiles don't have velocity markers. They work in a very different sort of way. Undetonated missiles and operational fighters may never be loaded onto ships. Once they're released, they will fight until they die, and they can't come back. All right, for fighters, they operate as though they're a little tiny ship with burn capacity and laser strength. They don't have any repair. They have a laser strength of 0, but if they're firing in formation, they are considered to have laser strengths of 1. As are the laser strengths of any other 0-strength ships that are firing in formation. So you get a bonus to have clusters of weak units firing in formation that's beyond the normal bonus for formations. Fighters are destroyed by launcher repair hits. Missiles have no laser strength, no launch capacity or repair. They don't operate as normal ships do. They're going to exist on the tactical display for a maximum of 2 turns after they're being salvoed. If they're not detonated or destroyed after 2 turns, they go away. Okay. Now, and they're destroyed by anything. Oh wait, a result of B is considered to have no effect. What the fuck is B? I don't remember B. B is burn capacity. Okay, so that doesn't destroy missiles. I thought it did. I thought everything destroyed missiles. And here, if the ship is a base or missile, the result changes to no effect. Good enough. Okay. Elsewhere in the play strategy, it said they're always like blown up, but it's close enough. Okay. So during the joint movement phase of the tactical turn in which they're released, a missile moves with its releasing ship. So you're going to have to kind of put it directly under the launching ship. That may be an issue if you've got stacking going on. And remember, it's going to be represented by 2 counters. So everything is stacked here, you know, so anyway. Which is weird. In the missile burn and movement phase of the following tactical turn, now if you remember, that is right after the withdrawal option. It's not when ships move. It gets another burst of speed. It's going to move the velocity markers equivalent to its salvoing ship exactly as if the ship were going to move again without any chance to change direction or anything. And then after it's moved in that manner, it can move the missile to any cube within 6 of the missile's position using true distance. If that cube has an enemy ship, you're allowed to detonate it. One ship in the area gets hit with the missile detonation table. And the combat results are the same types as on the laser fire. You roll 2 dice and you get your result. Okay, that's it for missiles. That's it for fighters. You know, it's almost amazing how simple this all is, right? Consider like the pages of rules involved in like SFB's movement table, rules and whatnot. And this is a more complex movement system. It really is. I love SPI. I really do. Their rules are I had to work hard to get the rules of the strategic game down a little bit better. But this is just really, I don't know, it's clean. Okay. So ships that are moving in the same direction and the same speed, they all have the same velocity markers, can be considered a formation as long as every ship in the formation is within 2 cubes of some other ship in the formation. This is all one formation. This could all be declared as one formation. Because, I don't know, because I'm like 2, okay, that's a 2 comma 2 comma, 2 comma 2. Let's take a look at that. 220 is a 3. I put these too close together. Let me shift these to make sure that they can be within the same formation. Because I just don't want to be too far apart. I don't think that changes his decision to enter on that side. Okay. So in movement effects, everything moves together using the same velocity and everything. Since movement's simultaneous, that's no big deal whatsoever, right? You're going to be just following. But if you change the burn of one ship in the formation, everything else in the formation has to change to that burn, or else ships are going to leave the formation. They have to have the exact same vectors. On laser combat, technically you're supposed to declare your three ship fire groups before you fire anything. I don't know how big a deal that is, but each ship in a formation is allowed to create a fire group with 2 other ships, exactly 2 other ships. During the laser combat, the fire group can elect to fire as either a single unit or as 3 independent ships. When it fires, the laser strengths of all the ships are totaled, and this number is considered to be the laser strength of the fire group as a whole. A fire group's fire is resolved as it's the fire of a single ship, using a die roll plus that total strength. However, the range is going to be the range of the furthest fire minus 2. So if you're able to all be at the same range, let's say you're all in the same cube, you get a 2-point bonus to your range. But if you're spread out at all, like these guys kind of are, you might end up not getting a bonus off of it, but you're probably going to end up at least as good. And I guess the idea has to, I don't know, concentration of fire or something like that. Who knows? We can come up with a hand-wavy explanation of why units that are closer together, see, to me it would be converging fire would be the advantage, but you're not getting that. Anyway. Damage control during combat. Remember, there's a repair phase in each turn. If your repair capacity is 2, you're capable of repairing 2 points of damage. If it's 1, you can repair 1 point of damage. If it's 1/2, you roll a die. It's a 50-50. Okay. This can be shot apart. It can never be repaired during combat. And the way you repair is you just erase damage to boxes that you're allowed to. If your laser is completely destroyed, you're not allowed to repair it. If your burn is completely destroyed, I don't think you're allowed to repair it. We go into some special rules for how the battle is deployed. The basic condition is one person is present and another person flies in. And that's what we see right here. This was his base. He's entered. Another possible condition is a revolt situation. In a revolt situation, I believe players alternate placing their ships and their bases. I'm not going to look it up, but I think that's how it works. We'll hit that, when we hit the campaign game, because unless we have a revolt as a scenario and I choose to play that. And then there's another possibility, which is that both people are arriving at the same time. One person will still own the planet and or any bases and ships that are already there, which means that there is a chance. You roll on this little table here, and on a 2 through 6, the defenders have entered first. He deploys his entering ships along with all the ships that were already there. On a 7, they're both going to arrive at the same time, and they just each arrive on a face of the cube with velocity of 4 or less. And otherwise, the defending forces, the ones that are already statically available in the thing, will arrive 1 or more turns later on a face. Okay. After the battle, some ships are considered crippled if they have their burn capacity destroyed. At the end of the battle, a die has to be rolled for each of these ships on the recovery table to determine whether or not they can be recovered. Probably not a big deal in the scenarios. I don't remember what the scenario victory conditions are. It talks about enemy ships withdrawn, but there's also a destroy, and is there a capture? There is no capture rules here, so I don't think that actually counts, but one of the things that can come from the recovery table is an enemy recovery. So now, you might think it's kind of funny that you have your burn destroyed, but you get a friendly recovery after you withdrew. The idea there is you were able to engage your nuclear engines, which cannot be damaged except by the ship being destroyed for whatever reason. You were able to engage them and accelerate far enough away that you're not going to be able to be caught or anything. Now, just for some of the historical or whatever here, some of the technical details behind the game or whatever, the concept is that you have a slow nuclear thruster, which handles your strategic movement. And then you have a certain amount of chemical burn, which allows you to maneuver for docking, for dealing with asteroids and stuff like that. That's what you're going to be using for combat. Seems like they have a hell of a lot of chemical burn, but whatever. Anyway, when you're entering into a battle area, you're kind of like, well, why am I going so slow? That's an interesting question, and it's one they didn't really cover there. Because if you have enough burn to slow yourself down with the chemical rockets, it would make sense that you would be able to come in at a somewhat faster speed than you're coming in this scenario. I think it's a play balance type thing, and you can make a kind of hand wavy argument of, well, look, you don't really know what's there, so you would be decelerating just the same as you would if you're going to connect with the base. I don't quite buy that. I think you should probably be able to have a higher number to start with here. That would be dangerous, though. If you've read Down Below Station, And this game kind of reminds me of Company War when you look at the whole thing, not the tactical. The tactical for this is much more impressive, at least in concept. The whole game is more impressive in concept, but I have a lot of fun with Company War. Company War is sort of like a baby brother to this, and I did a coverage of that a long time back. But if you look at Down Below Station, that is Company War is based on the novel of that. Actually, it's a whole series, I think. The idea of the speed that you were coming in out of, your normal. I think they're using hyperspace there. It's not like interplanetary movement. The speed that you're coming into a battle became such an important tactical consideration. And you can see why. If you're going fast enough, you can just zip in, shoot, zip out. And then, of course, you might have trouble, though, being able to turn around with your, using your normal rocket boosters. Because you don't have a lot of capability to, change direction. So, I don't know. This may have just been considered an optimal choice either for play balance, interest of play, whatever. But it does feel like you should be able to boost that up a little higher. If you're going 9, it's going to be damn hard to, get yourself into a position. If you blow by the enemy and you knock out, a ship or a base or something like that, that's great. But now what do? Remember, you're not going to have fuel. Like, these ships aren't carrying extra fuel that they could arrange to get, right? Their only place to refuel is if they make it back to another base. And the nuclear engine, that's going to slow you down and get you wherever you want to go, no matter how much you need it. It's a slower, it can't really be used for maneuvering because it takes so long to track. An interesting thing in here in terms of the Simonson's notes, he's got a system that's fairly complex for determining the movement over on the strategic board. But then this is like the expanded version of After the Holocaust. He goes into what you would need to do to calculate it correctly. And it's just astounding. He spends half a page basically describing the acts that you would need to do to create, to actually calculate to the day when ships would arrive and when they wouldn't. And that would, of course, could affect the tactical, the choices of where something lands on the tactical and everything. I'm perfectly happy to go with what was decided was playable. It's kind of like trying to do the Traveler space combat. Already this system is feeling very much like that, but at least it doesn't have gravity wells and stuff like that I have to deal with. All right, let's send this up. And, I'm going to be going dancing on low sleep again this week, but I couldn't get a nap in and I didn't get enough sleep tonight.